Hello. I've had a number of people ask me about what kinds of shortcuts and hotkeys I use, and I've held off on answering for three reasons. Number one, everyone has a different setup with their computer and laptop. Number two, everyone has different sized hands. And number three, everyone has their own system for what logically makes sense for hotkeys. But in this video, I'll tell you about all my hotkeys and shortcuts and tools and workflow. So this video is for people who want to know about what hotkeys I use. It's for people who want to know how to model this kind of helmet, because I got a request for modeling this kind of helmet, and that's what I'll do. And this video is also for people who are new to the channel and want to quickly get up to speed. So as I use every tool, I'll be telling you exactly what buttons I press. So first of all, W is for the move tool, E is for rotate, and R is for scale. Now some of the hotkeys I use come with 3ds Max by default. For example, W, E, R, that's by default, but most of them are custom ones that I've set up. Now if you press W, E, or R and then click on an object, you may accidentally scale, rotate, or move the object a little bit, unless you're very careful. For this reason, I recommend that you make a habit of quickly pressing Q, and that is simply the select object tool. So this allows you to select objects without being able to accidentally move them or rotate them. So make it a habit. Before you click on an object, simply press Q and then click on it, or select multiple objects. Alt plus W minimizes this viewport and shows you what other viewports you have here. If you wish to configure your viewports, you can click on the plus here and configure viewports. And then here in the layout panel, you can choose simply one or two screens or however much you want. I just use the default layout here. Also, under visual style and appearance, I like to make sure there's just one light. In newer version of 3ds Max, they have two lights on by default, but I prefer to have one light here. And for statistics, I like to make sure edge count, selection, polygon count, vertex count. You click on apply and OK. And a few more things is that 3ds Max 2011 introduced a new caddy system. If you go to customize preferences, I prefer to go right here, and this will be on by default. I prefer to turn this off. And what this will do is this will make sure that when you, for example, when I use connect edges, that it brings up this one right here. If I enable to use the caddy controls, then I will get this right here. And I personally don't find this comfortable. I think it's a little bit awkward to use, so I prefer to keep the caddy controls off. Also, in newer version of 3ds Max, there's a strange ghosting effect, a fading in and out effect. For example, if I press G, and now I press G again to turn off the grid, notice how the grid kind of slowly fades away. So G is to turn the grid on and off. And also notice that if I extrude this out, and as I move this here, you can kind of notice that there's a bit of a fading in effect where we can kind of see the leftovers. Like here, for example, you can see that there's all sorts of kind of ghost frames appearing. So to disable that, click on the plus, configure viewports, and under display performance, where it says improve quality progressively, you want to disable this. And now you should notice that there's no more ghosting effects. And if I press G for the grid, that's also been disabled. Also, customize user interface. Now this is where you go to set your custom hotkeys. If you want to set a hotkey, go under keyboard. If you want to create a button, go under toolbars. But here under mouse, I have disabled the zoom about mouse point and zoom about mouse point perspective and orthographic. I have disabled those. And if you have trouble with the focus in the viewport, you can also disable autofocus viewport. Alright, so far we've covered Alt W to minimize your viewport and see what else you have. You notice as I click on other viewports, we have this kind of yellow outline letting me know which viewport is active. So right now, to kind of move around, I'm clicking the middle mouse button and simply moving the mouse around. In order to rotate around an object, I will hold Alt and then middle mouse button and move the mouse. Alright, so that's just the basic navigation. And here I'm middle mouse button clicking to make the viewport active. Alt W, middle mouse button, Alt W. W-E-R. Now if I press Q to switch to the Move tool, select Object, if I keep pressing Q, it will activate various selection modes. Circular to fence, and basically this gives you various options. For example, if I create a plane here, and then I, let's say, use the cut tool and cut from here to here. Now in order for me to select all these objects, if I'm using the default, let's say, rectangular selection mode, I will have to kind of make a selection here and then here. But if I use the fence selection mode, I can just click, and accurately select whatever I want here. And then we have lasso, which gives us this lasso right here. We have spray, which allows you to kind of spray what you want. And this may be useful, for example, if you want to model, for example, some damage in an object, and you're just going to kind of spray here, hold Control to select multiple objects, in this case polygons. So if I start clicking again, notice the previous selection is gone. But if I hold Control as I click, it will add to my selection. So this is a good example where you can use the spray mode. So now I'll switch to vertex, select it all, and maybe do a relax to kind of relax the holes here. What I can do is switch to border mode, select this, and then use relax. So you can see how we can get these kinds of holes for this kind of more detailed modeling. So all the selection modes have their uses, and you can switch between them by pressing Q. If you select an object and press Alt and X, you'll make it transparent. Now sometimes you may accidentally press a key and disable some things. For example, if I switch to WER, you can see this is the transform gizmo. This is for moving, this is for rotating, this is for scaling. However, if you accidentally press X, you will disable that, and it will be kind of much harder to manipulate this. So simply press X again to return your gizmo. If you press F3, you'll go into this wireframe mode, which will disable all the textures, just allows you to see the wireframe of each object. If you have, let's say, selected these polygons, and you press Alt X to make it transparent, you can see it's still a little bit difficult to see what's behind the red here. But if you press F2, you'll get rid of that effect. The polygons are still selected, but you can see behind them a lot easier. That's F2. F4 allows you to see the edges. So generally I can tell which object I've selected because I press F4. Let's say we have two objects here. You can tell which object is selected because you will see a little gizmo here, but you can also press F4 and the object with the white edges is the one that you have selected. So that's F4. But under here, where it says shaded or realistic, by default it's set to realistic. I've set it to shaded because it's a little bit simpler on the processor and video card. But here under display selected, we have an option display selected with edged faces. So you can see right now I've got the edged faces turned off. But if I select an object, the edged faces for that object will be returned. Alt Q is isolation mode. You can tell that it's isolated because you have this little light bulb here. And when I press Alt and Q, the object is isolated from everything else. And if I press Alt Q again, we exit out of isolation mode and we can see everything else. Clicking here or pressing M opens up the material editor. And I will cover this in its own separate video about how you can use and create materials and apply different textures and things like that. But that is M. Now once you have gone and set up your statistics here, you can actually make them visible by pressing 7. And you can see they show up right here. They show up individually in each viewport. So if I go to the front viewport, you can see they're not here. But if I press 7, they'll be here as well. You can begin modeling several ways. I like to start with a plane. But first let me show you how I actually set up this reference image here. What I did was I created a plane with the same size as the amount of pixels in this image. So in this case, it was 1600 by 1020. I apply an poly modifier. Let me just make a clone of this. To create a clone, hold shift and then move this object. You can also hold shift and rotate the object. That will create a clone as well. You can also hold shift and scale the object. And that creates, all of these three methods allow you to create clones. You can also simply right click and clone, copy instance or reference. So I'll delete this editor poly modifier. So what I did was I inserted a loop through here, deleted the bottom half. I inserted a loop through here. I selected this polygon right here, E, to switch to rotate. Here I switched to the second option here, selection center, activated snaps. If you right click here, you'll see your snap settings. I basically set the angle to 22.5 and I pressed A to activate angle snap. You can also click right here. And then I went to snaps and activated edge segment here and pressed S to activate snaps. So S is for snaps and A is for angle snap. Then I was able to rotate it around here. First you want to make sure that the Z-axis is active. Click here and then I can rotate it 90 degrees around here. And that's how I set up the reference image. Then I went to the front viewport and moved the reference image until it was right in the center in terms of the x-axis. So I'll go to the front viewport. I can press G to turn off the grid here as well. The grid settings are different for each viewport, so you can have them on here, off here, off here, on here. So I will go to here, the Create panel, Geometry, Plane. And one thing we can do is kind of think about where do we want to start on this model. There's a number of good places we can start. Here I'm going to start on the visor since it's the focal point. And one more thing to note before we get started is that concept art is not perfect. So don't get frustrated if things don't line up perfectly in the front part and the side of this image. Just looking at this image, I can already see some differences here. For example, here on the front we can see that this line goes all the way through here and even right here, but on the side image you can see that the line stops right here and it does not go all the way through. You can see here on the front, this line here, it goes up, and then we have a second piece right here, a separate piece. But notice how on the side image this line goes here and then just kind of intersects with this line here. So it should be kind of going up here as well. So every concept art isn't perfect, there are differences here. And one more thing before we start is I want to show you how you can quickly set up a material. So if you have the material editor open here, you can minimize it and bring it back up. So simply right click here, materials, standard, double click, and it shows up right here. Let's increase the self-illumination. And then to assign a new texture to it, you can do three things. You can click right here and select bitmap. You can right click here, maps, bitmap. You can click right here in the diffuse color, this little circle to the left, click and drag, and select bitmap. And once you click on it, navigate to the folder where you keep your reference images and select it. However, in this case, I already have it right here. So what I'll simply do is click here, click and drag, and plug it here under diffuse color. I can double click right here, and I can edit it right here. Alright, and one more thing is, notice how this texture is a little bit low resolution. The actual image I'm using has a much higher resolution, but in the viewport it's limited. So, click on plus, configure viewports, and right here under texture maps you can see it's set to 512. I'll set it to 1024, power of 2, and I'll click on OK. However, in the actual viewport you can see the quality has not improved. So going back to the material editor, I'll simply make sure this is selected, double click here, we have a button here called reload. So what I will do is move this to another window, and now notice how the texture changes once I click on reload. So now you can see the quality is much improved, And now we can begin modeling in the front viewport. I'll create a plane right here. And I will right click here. On the right of every value, you see that we have these two little triangles, one for up and one for down. So you can click on them to slowly move the object. You can also click and hold to quickly move it. If you right click on them, you reduce it to its minimum value, and I will give this a new material. In order to apply material, I will make sure it's selected. I don't have to double click, I just have to click on it one time. So for example, this material right here, and I'll click on this button, Assign Material to Selection. And you can see I have multiple materials set up here for different parts of this helmet. We have a gray part, we have this dark gray part, we have this part which looks to be a little bit darker, but that may be because of the shadows, and we have the blue for the helmet. So I've got those four materials right here, as well as this material for the actual plane, and this material has the self-illumination set to a much higher value. And the reason for this is if it were set to a lower value, now as you rotate around the viewport, you actually have a light behind your camera, and as you move around, you can see that the light follows your camera. So notice how this object is now completely dark on this part, but light on this part, and then it changes. However, if I set the self-illumination to a much higher value, it's now fully bright no matter what angle I'm using. And I also want to set up a black object color because I find that it makes it easier to see what I'm doing. So right away I'll apply symmetry by clicking right here. To set up your custom quick buttons here, click here, configure modifier sets. Here you can change the number of buttons. I've got this set to 26 right now, and simply click and drag and put it wherever you want. And then click here and show buttons. So I pretty much got Edit Poly, Turbo Smooth, Symmetry, and a lot of important ones that I use. And two new ones are Crease Set and Open Subdiv. So then I can simply right click and collapse to. So I've set up the symmetry, and I want to make sure that I use editable poly. So I'll right click, editable poly, symmetry, and here we go. Sometimes symmetry can cause extra vertices to appear, so I'll just select this vertex and remove. So notice right now as I move this vertex, nothing is happening on the left. If you want to see all of your modifiers in action, click here, Show End Result On and Off Toggle. And now when I move around, notice how the symmetry is active. Right now you can see there's a little bit of an orange edge right here. This is called the show cage. I will turn this off for now. Now the way that the modifiers work here is that if you have this active, all of the modifiers on top will be active as well. So let's say I also put an open subdivision modifier here. Alright, I'll also delete the left side. So right now all we have is a polygon, 4 edges, and 4 vertices. But if I activate Show End Result On Off and Toggle, it will show me what the object looks like with symmetry and open subdivision applied. So let's say that I apply a poly and insert a loop right here. You can see right now this is a very simple object. If I turn off the open subdivision modifier by clicking on this little light bulb here, and I activate Show End Result On and Off, you can see symmetry is now active. If I also activate open subdivision, you can see that becomes active too, and it turns my simple geometry into something more complex. This is called subdivision. So you now see that this simple geometry becomes a lot smoother. And it becomes smoother the higher iterations are here. So 1, 2, 3, 4. If you turn off Iceland Display, you will see the actual geometry right here. If you want to simplify it, activate Iceland Display, and you will see a much more simplified view. Now, I will show you where you can set this to a shortcut. Customize user interface. So I'll go under Keyboard. To quickly find a tool here, simply type it in. In this case, if I hover over here, it's Show End Result On Off Toggle, So here I will type in SH. Make sure in keyboard, SH, and simply scroll down till you see it. Here we have two show-in results. So which one to use? Well, 3ds Max has many tools, and sometimes the same tool is located in multiple locations. For example, sometimes the same tool is located up here in the toolbar and on the right as well. In this case, I've got show-in result set to space, and it's the top one, not the bottom one, but the top one. I've got that set to space. So every time that I hit space, it shows me what all of my modifiers above do. And the reason this is useful is that I can, for example, model using the simple geometry with the simple geometric view, and then I can press space and see what kind of effect it will have. I can also, for example, select this, start moving it around, press space, and now I can still continue to move it and see what the final result looks like. This allows me to get accurate curves, in this case on the helmet. So the actual geometry will be very simple, but once I hit space and apply symmetry and open subdivision, I will get the final smooth result. Occasionally, you may want to establish your curvature. So right now this object is very simple. It's made up of 3 polygons. But let's say I want to add more detail to it. We need more polygons for that. So what I will do is, let's say, set the iterations to 2. I will apply a poly right on top. And now I have a lot more polygons to work with.